What if a single act of kindness, a gesture worth less than a tank of gas, cost you everything you had? For 24-year-old Clara Evans, a $10 bill wasn't just money. It was the final straw that got her fired, leaving her and her desperately ill brother on the verge of homelessness. She walked away from her job that rainy Tuesday, with nothing but shame and the memory of a confused old woman's grateful eyes. But that frail woman in the worn-out coat wasn't who she seemed. She was Evelyn Beaumont, a name that could buy the entire city block, and she had just set in motion a chain of events that would shatter Clara's world before rebuilding it into something she could never have imagined. The smell of stale coffee and bacon grease was the perfume of Clara Evans's life. It clung to her uniform, her hair, and her weary spirit long after she clocked out of the Silver Spoon diner. The diner was a relic, a capsule of a bygone era, with its cracked red vinyl booths and a jukebox that had been stuck on a loop of Frank Sinatra for 6 months. For Clara, it was both a lifeline and a cage. Her life operated on a razor's edge, a delicate balance of income and outflow dictated by the relentless needs of her 10-year-old brother Leo. Leo was her world. He had a smile that could outshine the grimy diner lights and a laugh that was the only music she truly heard. He also had a rare autoimmune disorder, a cruel lottery ticket of genetics that required a cocktail of medications so expensive the pharmacy receipts felt like ransom notes. Every tip she earned, every extra shift she took, went into the Leo Fund, a worn envelope hidden in her sock drawer that was perpetually, terrifyingly close to empty. That Tuesday, the rain was relentless, mirroring the storm brewing inside her. Leo had a bad night, his fever spiking, and the doctor had mentioned a new experimental treatment. The phrase "not fully covered by insurance" echoed in her ears with the rhythm of the clattering plates. On top of that, her manager, Mr. Henderson, was in a particularly foul mood. He was a man whose small-time power had inflated his ego to epic proportions, and he roamed the diner floor like a vulture circling a carcass. "Evans Table 7 has been waiting for their check for 3 minutes," he'd barked, his pencil-thin mustache twitching. "This isn't a library. Turntables earn tips." Clara just nodded, the familiar burn of resentment hot in her throat. She forced a smile and scurried to Table 7. It was around 2 p.m., the post-lunch lull when the old woman tossed him in. She was tiny, swallowed by a threadbare beige coat that looked decades old. Her hair was a wispy cloud of white, and her eyes, a pale, watery blue, seemed lost and unfocused. She moved slowly, her hand trembling as she gripped the back of each booth for support. Henderson shot her a look of pure disdain, clearly marking her as a low-tip, high-maintenance customer who would nurse a single cup of tea for hours. "I'll take her," Clara said quickly before he could steer the woman out. She felt a protective pang. The woman reminded her of her grandmother before she'd passed. Clara seated her in a quiet corner booth. "What can I get for you today, ma'am?" she asked, her voice gentle. The woman blinked as if surfacing from a deep thought. "Oh, tea. Just tea, please, dear, and perhaps a slice of toast with marmalade." Clara brought the order promptly, making sure the tea was hot and the toast was perfectly golden. The woman who mumbled her name was Eliza, ate slowly, almost reverently. She seemed to be studying the worn-out pattern on the chipped china, her gaze distant. Clara checked on her, periodically refilling her tea, offering a kind word. She didn't expect a big tip. She just felt a human connection to the woman's quiet solitude. An hour later, Eliza shuffled to the front counter, her purse a cracked leather thing clutched in her hands. Clara rang up the bill. $4.75, she said with a warm smile. Eliza fumbled inside her purse, her brow furrowed in confusion. She pulled out a small handful of coins, a crumpled tissue, and a key. Her hands began to shake more violently. "Oh, dear," she whispered, her voice cracking. I seem to have misplaced my wallet. I was so sure it was in here." Panic flickered in her pale eyes. It was the kind of raw, helpless fear Clara had seen in her own mother's eyes when the first of Leo's medical bills had arrived. Mr. Henderson materialized at Clara's shoulder, his presence a cold shadow. "Problem?" he asked, his voice dripping with faux concern. "She can't find her wallet," Clara explained quietly. Henderson's eyes narrowed on the old woman. "No wallet, so you order food you can't pay for. That's theft, lady." "No, I would never," Eliza cried, tears welling up. I'm so forgetful lately." "Yeah, I've heard that one before," Henderson sneered. "I'm calling the police." "No." Clara's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. She couldn't bear it. The thought of this frail, confused woman being humiliated by the police over a $5 bill was monstrous. "Please, Mr. Henderson, it's fine, I'll cover it." Henderson turned his venomous gaze on her. "You'll what?" "Are you insane, Evans? That comes out of your pay, and it sets a precedent. Soon every freeloader in town will be coming here for a free meal from St. Clara." "It's $5, Clara pleaded, her voice low. "Just let it go." But he wouldn't. He seemed to relish the power the public shaming. Clara looked at Eliza's terrified face, and something inside her snapped. The frustration of her life, the bills, the worry for Leo, the constant degradation of this job welled up. She reached into her own apron pocket, her fingers bypassing the meager tips she'd made. She pulled out a folded $10 bill. It was her bus fare for the rest of the week, the money she was counting on to get to and from the hospital for Leo's next appointment. Without it, she'd have to walk the 4 miles. She didn't hesitate. "Here," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she pushed the bill into Eliza's trembling hand. "Please take this, pay for your meal and have enough to get a cab home so you don't have to walk in this rain." Eliza looked from the money to Clara's face, her watery eyes wide with disbelief. "I couldn't possibly." "Just take it," Clara insisted, closing the woman's fingers around the bill. Henderson watched his face a mask of thunderous rage. "That's it, Evans. You're fired." The words hit her like a physical blow. What? For being kind. For insubordination. For undermining my authority. And for conducting personal financial transactions on company time. He spat, his voice rising. "Get your things. You're done." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes, hot and angry. She looked at the old woman, who was now weeping silently. Clara gave her a final, small, reassuring smile before turning to face her manager. She didn't say a word. There was nothing left to say. She untied her grease-stained apron, laid it on the counter, and walked away from the only job she had. The rain outside suddenly feeling very, very cold. She had no job, no bus fare, and a sick little brother at home. All for a $4 cup of tea and a moment of compassion that had just cost her everything. The walk home was a 4-mile pilgrimage through a purgatory of shame and fear. Each raindrop that plastered her thin jacket to her skin felt like a tiny cold accusation. Fired, Judd, fired. The word was a drumbeat against her skull. How could she have been so stupid? Kindness was a luxury, a privilege she couldn't afford. The $10 wasn't just bus fare. It was a symbol of her recklessness. When she finally reached her small second-floor apartment, the smell of damp plaster and boiled vegetables did little to comfort her. Leo was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, his face pale, but his eyes lighting up when he saw her. "Clara, you're home early," he chirped, his voice a little hoarse. She forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. "Mr. Henderson was feeling generous and let me off." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She couldn't tell him. She couldn't let him see her fear. His own battle was immense enough. He didn't need to carry her burdens, too. The next 2 days were a blur of numb anxiety. Clara scoured online job boards, her stomach twisting at the entry-level positions that demanded bachelor's degrees and 3 years of experience. She counted the money in the Leo fund, 342,017. It was a pathetic shield against the dragon of his medical needs. The rent was due in a week. The pharmacy would need a copay on Friday. The walls of her life were closing in, squeezing the very air from her lungs. On Thursday afternoon, as Clara was attempting to turn a can of tomato soup and a stale loaf of bread into a meal, a sound from the street below broke her concentration. It wasn't the usual rumble of the city bus or the squeal of a neighbor's brakes. This was a low, powerful purr, the sound of expensive engineering. She peeked through the grimy window. Parked in front of her dilapidated apartment building, looking as out of place as a diamond in a dustbin, was a gleaming black Lincoln Navigator. Its tinted windows reflected the dreary grey sky, making it look like a sleek obsidian beast. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was it a debt collector? Had the hospital sent someone? She watched, frozen, as the driver's side door opened. A man in a perfectly tailored charcoal grey suit emerged. He was tall, with sharp features, silvering hair at the temples, and an air of severe, unapproachable authority. He checked a piece of paper in his hand, and then stared directly up at her, building his gaze sweeping across the windows until she felt with a jolt it landed on hers. A moment later, a sharp, decisive knock echoed from her apartment door. Leo, startled, looked at her with wide eyes. "Who's that?" "I don't know, sweetie. Stay right there," she whispered, her mind racing. She opened the door a crack, the flimsy security chain. The only thing between her and the imposing stranger. It was the man from the car. He didn't smile. His expression was neutral, professional, and utterly intimidating. "Miss Clara Evans?" he asked. His voice was deep and resonant, a voice that commanded boardrooms, not crumbling apartment hallways. "Yes." She squeaked, her throat suddenly dry. "My name is Julian Croft," he said, holding up a sleek leather wallet and showing her an ID that identified him as an attorney. "I represent a client who has asked me to find you." Clara's mind went blank. An attorney. Was Mr. Henderson suing her? Had the old woman, Eliza, filed some bizarre complaint? I don't understand. I don't know any lawyers," she stammered. "I assure you, you do not know me," he said, his tone precise and clipped. "But my client was very insistent. She witnessed your interaction with your former employer on Tuesday." The blood drained from her face. Eliza. It was about Eliza. Was her family suing her for giving their confused relative money? Was it some kind of elaborate scam? "Is she okay?" Clara asked the question, tumbling out before she could stop it. For the first time, a flicker of something unreadable passed through Julian Croft's eyes. "She is fine. In fact, she is the reason I am here. She has instructed me to give you this." He slid a thick, heavy, cream-colored business card through the crack in the door. Clara took it with trembling fingers. It was embossed with a single elegant letter B in gold leaf. Below it was an address, a prestigious suite number in the Beaumont Tower, the most iconic and expensive skyscraper in the city, and a time tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. "My client has requested a meeting," Croft explained. "She has a proposition for you. All transportation will be compensated. I strongly advise you to be there." A proposition. Her mind swirled with 1,000 wild possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Was this a trap? A joke? Who is your client?" she managed to ask. "You will find that out tomorrow. Miss Evans," he said smoothly. He gave a curt, formal nod. "Until then." He turned and walked away, his expensive shoes making no sound on the worn linoleum. Clara watched from the window as he got back into the Lincoln Navigator, and it pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the city traffic as silently as it had arrived. She was left standing in her doorway, the cold draft seeping in, holding a card that felt like it was from another universe. On the back, in elegant looping script that looked like it belonged to a much steadier hand than the one she remembered, were 3 words that made her heart stop. "For your kindness." Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat at her small kitchen table, the elegant card a stark white rectangle against the scuffed wood. A proposition. The words echoed in her head, a tantalizing and terrifying whisper. Every instinct screamed that this was too strange to be real. It had to be a scam, a cruel prank, or worse. Yet the memory of Eliza's tear-filled eyes, the feel of her trembling hand that was real, and the 3 words on the back of the card felt genuine. By morning, desperation had won out over suspicion. What did she have to lose? A job she'd already lost. Her dignity. That was already in tatters. With Leo's worried but hopeful eyes on her, she put on her only nice blouse, a pale blue one she'd bought at a thrift store, and took the bus downtown. The $10 bill she'd used for Eliza was a ghost in her pocket. She'd had to borrow the fare from her neighbor. The Beaumont Tower was a steel and glass behemoth that scraped the sky, a monument to a world of wealth and power she had only ever seen from a distance. Walking into the lobby was like stepping onto a different planet. The air smelled faintly of leather and something floral. The floors were polished marble that reflected the light like a mirror, and people in sharp suits moved with a quiet, confident purpose. Clara felt clumsy and out of place, her worn-out flats squeaking softly on the pristine floor. She gave her name to the concierge at the main desk, a man so impeccably groomed he looked like a movie star. He didn't sneer or look down on her. He simply checked his computer, a small professional smile on his face. "Ah, yes, Miss Evans. You're expected. Please take the private elevator on your right to the penthouse." The private elevator. The words themselves were intimidating. The ride up was silent and dizzyingly fast, the city shrinking below her. When the doors opened, they didn't open into a hallway, but directly into the most breathtaking space Clara had ever seen. It was a penthouse apartment that seemed to be floating in the clouds. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire room, offering a 360-degree panorama of the city. The furniture was minimalist and elegant. The art on the walls looked like it belonged in a museum, and a grand piano stood gleaming in one corner. And standing by the window, not in a threadbare coat, but in a beautifully tailored cashmere trouser suit, was the woman she had known as Eliza. She was transformed. Her white hair was expertly coiffed. Her watery blue eyes were now sharp and intelligent, missing the fog of confusion Clara had seen in the diner. There was a vitality to her, a powerful stillness that commanded the entire room. Beside her stood the attorney, Julian Croft. Clara froze, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The woman turned, and a warm, genuine smile spread across her face. It was the same woman, yet it wasn't. The frailty was gone, replaced by an aura of formidable strength. "Miss Evans." "Clara. Thank you for coming," she said, her voice clear and strong, without a hint of the tremor Clara remembered. "Please come in." Clara took a few hesitant steps into the room, feeling like an intruder. "Eliza, I don't understand." The woman chuckled, a surprisingly rich and melodic sound. "The name is Evelyn. Evelyn Beaumont. Eliza was my grandmother's name. I use it sometimes when I wish to be invisible. Evelyn Beaumont." The name hit Clara like a physical force. Everyone knew that name. Beaumont Industries was a global empire. Evelyn Beaumont was one of the richest, most powerful women in the world, a philanthropic legend, and a ruthless businesswoman. Her face was on the cover of magazines. She was practically royalty in this city. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. But the diner," she stammered, unable to form a coherent thought. "Yes, the diner," Evelyn said, her smile softening. "My late husband Arthur and I had our first date in a place just like that, 50 years ago. Sometimes when the world of boardrooms and balance sheets becomes too much, I like to go back, to remember what's real." She sighed, a flicker of genuine sadness in her eyes. "It seems that what's real is that people are often unkind to the elderly and the poor, until I met you." She gestured for Clara to sit on one of the plush, cream-colored sofas. Clara sank into it, the cushion sighing around her. "What you did for me, Clara," Evelyn continued, her gaze direct and intense, "was more than just covering a bill. Your manager was ready to call the police on a confused old woman. He saw a nuisance. You saw a human being. You defended me at great personal cost. You lost your job for me. And then you gave me your bus fare." She shook her head slightly, a look of marvel on her face. "In a world that constantly tells us to look out for number one, you chose compassion. That is a quality rarer and more valuable than all the money in this building." Julian Croft stepped forward, holding a sleek leather folder. "Miss Beaumont would like to compensate you for your trouble, Miss Evans. She has authorized a payment of $50,000 for the loss of your employment and the distress caused." Clara's jaw dropped. $50,000. It was more money than she had ever seen. It was a lifeline. It was Leo's experimental treatment. It was rent for 2 years. It was safety. Tears welled in her eyes. Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Evelyn said kindly. "But that isn't the proposition, Clara. That is merely an apology for what you endured on my behalf." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "The proposition is this: I am an old woman, and despite my wealth, I find myself surrounded by people who want something from me. Sycophants, executives, and my own grandson, who sees me as a walking bank vault. Genuine character, true integrity. That is in short supply. I saw it in you at the Silver Spoon." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locking with Clara's. "I want to offer you a job, not as a waitress, but as my personal assistant. Your duties would be varied, managing my schedule, accompanying me to events, acting as a sounding board. But more than that, I need someone by my side I can trust. Someone who isn't blinded by my name or my money. The salary would be substantial, and it would come with a full benefits package, including the best health insurance money can buy. She let that last part sink in. The best health insurance money can buy. The words were a key unlocking a door in Clara's mind to a future where she didn't have to lie awake at night, terrified of a phone call from the hospital's billing department. A future where Leo could get the care he needed without bankrupting them. But it was more than the money. It was Evelyn's gaze. In her eyes, Clara didn't see pity. She saw respect. Evelyn Beaumont wasn't offering her a handout. She was offering her a position, a chance. She was judging her not on her resume, but on her character. Clara thought of Mr. Henderson's sneering face and the humiliation of being fired. She thought of the long, rainy walk home and the fear that had been her constant companion. And then she looked at the powerful, intelligent woman in front of her, who had seen something worthwhile in her. Taking a deep breath, Clara straightened her shoulders. "Mrs. Beaumont," she said, her voice clear and steady for the first time. "When can I start?" Stepping into Evelyn Beaumont's world was like learning to breathe a new kind of air. The first few weeks were a dizzying whirlwind of new experiences. Clara was given a modest but beautiful apartment in a building owned by the Beaumont Corporation, just a few blocks from the tower. It was clean, safe, and for the first time in years, quiet. When she brought Leo to see it, his eyes wide with wonder were all the confirmation she needed that she'd made the right choice. The job itself was demanding. Clara's life, once dictated by the rhythm of lunch rushes and coffee refills, was now governed by Evelyn's labyrinthine schedule. There were board meetings to prepare for charity galas to organize and personal appointments to manage. Clara had to learn about stock portfolios, philanthropic endowments, and the complex web of Beaumont Industries' global operations. She was a quick study, driven by a fierce desire not to disappoint the woman who had placed such incredible faith in her. Evelyn was a patient but exacting teacher. "The details are never just details, Clara," she'd say, reviewing a seating chart for a fundraiser. "They are the language object. Where you seat someone tells them exactly how much you value them." Or, "Never enter a negotiation without knowing what the other person wants more than what you're offering." Power isn't about having the most, it's about understanding the most. But beyond the professional mentorship, a genuine bond began to form. They would spend quiet evenings in the penthouse, Evelyn sharing stories of her late husband, Arthur, and the empire they had built from the ground up. Clara, in turn, found herself opening up about Leo, about her dreams of one day finishing the nursing degree she'd had to abandon, and about the quiet strength of her parents before they were gone. Evelyn listened with an empathy that Clara had rarely experienced. She saw Clara not as an employee, but as a person. The most immediate and profound change was for Leo. With the premium health insurance Evelyn provided, Clara was able to get him an appointment with Dr. Annabelle Reed, the top pediatric immunologist in the country. Dr. Reed confirmed the experimental treatment was his best option, and with insurance covering the astronomical cost, scheduled him to begin the following month. For the first time, Clara felt the crushing weight of that fear for her brother's life begin to lift. But this new world was not without its shadows, and the biggest shadow was cast by Marcus Beaumont, Evelyn's only grandson. Clara first met Marcus about a month into her new role. He swaggered into the penthouse unannounced, dressed in a designer suit that looked like it cost more than her old car. A smirk permanently etched on his handsome face. He was in his late 20s, with the easy arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his life. He ignored Clara completely, planting a perfunctory kiss on Evelyn's cheek. "Grandmother, I hope you're well. I need to talk to you about the funding for my new tech venture. The seed money you provided just isn't cutting it." "Marcus," Evelyn said, her voice cool, "we discussed this. The board and I felt your business plan was underdeveloped. We will not be investing further at this time." Marcus's smile tightened. "It's a revolutionary app, Grandmother. You just don't understand the market." His gaze then fell on Clara, who was standing quietly by the desk. He looked her up and down with open disdain. "And who is this? The new help?" "This is Clara Evans, my personal assistant," Evelyn said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Clara, this is my grandson Marcus." "Assistant," Marcus scoffed, drawing the word out. "Right. I heard you picked some waitress out of a greasy spoon. A real charity case." He gave Clara a dismissive smirk. "Don't get too comfortable, darling. Grandmother has a new pet project every year. They rarely last." Clara felt a hot flush of anger, but held her tongue, meeting his gaze with a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate him more. From that day on, Marcus became a constant, corrosive presence. He saw Clara not just as a low-class interloper, but as a direct threat. In his mind, every dollar Evelyn spent on Clara's salary, her apartment or Leo's medical care, was a dollar stolen from his inheritance. He was convinced she was a masterful gold digger, a cunning manipulator who had somehow tricked his aging grandmother. His attacks were subtle at first. He would accidentally spill coffee on important documents Clara had prepared. He would change meeting times in Evelyn's calendar, making Clara look incompetent. He would make snide remarks in front of other staff, referring to her as the waitress or Granny's little project. Clara did her best to ignore it, focusing on her work and on the progress Leo was making. She was thriving under Evelyn's tutelage, gaining confidence and skills she never knew she possessed. She learned how to command a room with a quiet question, how to dissect a financial report, and how to stand her ground. The turning point came during a planning meeting for the annual Beaumont Foundation Gala, the city's premier philanthropic event. Clara, tasked with managing the budget, had found a way to save nearly $100,000 by renegotiating with a catering vendor, money that could be reallocated to a new children's hospital wing. She presented her findings clearly and concisely. The board members were impressed. Marcus, who sat on the board due to his name rather than his merit, was visibly furious. After the meeting, he cornered her in the hallway. "You think you're so clever, don't you, little waitress?" He snarled, his voice a low hiss. "You think you can come in here with your spreadsheets and your sad little story and impress everyone. But I know what you are. You're a parasite latching on to my grandmother." "I'm just doing my job, Marcus," Clara said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Your job is to fetch tea," he shot back, stepping closer. "You are nothing, and I'm going to prove it. My grandmother might be getting old and sentimental, but the world will see you for what you are. You don't belong here, and I'm going to be the one to throw you back in the gutter where you were found." His eyes were full and filled with a venom that chilled her to the bone. She realized then that this wasn't just about jealousy or snobbery. It was a declaration of war. Marcus wouldn't stop until he had destroyed her, and he would not hesitate to hurt his own grandmother to do it. The perfect world she had found was more fragile than she knew, and a storm was coming. Marcus's declaration of war was not an empty threat. He began to weave a web of sabotage so intricate and insidious that Clara felt like she was constantly walking on a knife's edge. He had moved past petty annoyances and into the realm of calculated destruction designed to ruin her reputation and sever the trust Evelyn had placed in her. His first major attack came through the Beaumont Foundation. Clara was managing a grant application for a local after-school program in a low-income neighborhood. She had spent weeks working with the program director, a passionate woman named Maria, to perfect the proposal. The grant was for a modest sum, but would mean the world to the children it served, providing hot meals and tutoring. Clara had poured her heart into it, seeing a reflection of her own past struggles in their mission. On the day the grant was to be approved by the Foundation's committee, Marcus, who rarely attended such meetings, made a surprise appearance. As the proposal was being discussed, he interjected with a practiced air of concern. "I'm afraid I have to raise a red flag," he announced, holding up a file. "I did a little digging into this Safe Harbor Youth Center. It seems they have a history of financial mismanagement. In fact," he said, pulling out a document, "it appears their former director was investigated for embezzlement 2 years ago." The room went silent. The committee members looked shocked. Clara's blood ran cold. She knew nothing about this. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, his eyes glinting as he glanced at Clara, "it seems our own internal vetting process managed by Miss Evans completely missed this crucial detail. It makes one question the thoroughness of the work being done and whether personal sentiment is clouding professional judgment." The grant was immediately tabled, pending a full investigation. Clara was humiliated. Later, she frantically called Maria, who was in tears. The director in question had been fired years ago, all charges had been dropped, and the center had been under new, scrupulous management ever since. Marcus had twisted an old, resolved issue into a current scandal. He had deliberately withheld the information until the meeting to cause maximum damage to both the center and Clara's credibility. Evelyn, however, was not so easily fooled. "Marcus has always been lazy," she told Clara that evening. "The only time he digs is when he's trying to bury someone. Find the full story, Clara. Bring the committee the truth. Don't let him win." Buoyed by Evelyn's faith, Clara worked through the night compiling police reports, letters of recommendation for the new director, and the center's impeccable financial records for the past 2 years. She presented the complete file to the committee the next day. The grant was approved, but the stain of Marcus's accusation lingered. Some board members now looked at her with a hint of suspicion. Simultaneously, Clara faced a new crisis at home. Leo had begun his experimental treatment, but he wasn't responding as well as Dr. Reed had hoped. He was constantly tired, his fever returned intermittently, and he had lost his appetite. The cheerful boy, who had been so excited about their new life, was now quiet and withdrawn. "It's not uncommon to have setbacks, Doctor," Reed assured Clara during a tense hospital visit. "His body is fighting. We may need to consider a more aggressive and significantly more invasive next phase of treatment if he doesn't stabilize soon. It involves a bone marrow transplant." The words hung in the sterile air of the examination room. A transplant. It was a terrifying prospect with risks of its own. The pressure mounted on Clara, her worry for Leo, a constant aching presence beneath the surface of her professional poise. She felt as if she were fighting battles on 2 fronts, one in the gleaming boardrooms of Beaumont Tower and the other in the hushed antiseptic hallways of the Children's Hospital. Marcus, ever the opportunist, seemed to have a 6th sense for her vulnerability. His next attack was far more personal and cruel. Evelyn kept a small private collection of jewelry in a safe in her penthouse office. Most of it had belonged to her mother and grandmother, pieces with immense sentimental value. Her most treasured item was a sapphire and diamond brooch that her husband Arthur had given her on their first anniversary. She rarely wore it, but she would often take it out, holding it, as she told Clara stories about their early years together. One afternoon, while Evelyn was in a lengthy meeting, Clara was working in the office. Marcus came in, claiming he was looking for a misplaced fountain pen. He lingered for an unusual amount of time, making small talk that was clearly a facade. Clara, distracted by a call from Leo's nurse, was only half paying attention. He left after a few minutes, and she thought nothing of it. 2 days later, Evelyn went to the safe. "Clara, have you seen Arthur's brooch?" She called out, a note of confusion in her voice. "I was sure I put it back in its case." They searched the office, then the entire penthouse. It was gone. Julian Croft was called in immediately, as was the head of security. The building's surveillance was reviewed. The footage showed only authorized personnel entering the penthouse: Evelyn, Julian, the cleaning staff who were always supervised, and Clara, and on the afternoon in question, Marcus. When questioned, Marcus put on a brilliant performance of shock and concern. "The brooch, Arthur's brooch, is gone. That's terrible." Then with feigned reluctance he said, "I don't want to point fingers, but I did see Clara near the safe the other day. She seemed nervous. And frankly, grandmother, you have to admit it's a bit strange. You take this woman with nothing off the street, shower her with money and opportunity. Desperation can make people do foolish things." The implication was clear and poisonous. Clara, the poor waitress, the charity case with a sick brother and mounting medical bills, was the obvious suspect. She had the access, the opportunity, and in Marcus's twisted narrative, the motive. Clara stood in the opulent office. The suspicion of the security chief a palpable force, Marcus's feigned sympathy a blade in her back. She looked at Evelyn, her heart breaking. She saw not accusation in the old woman's eyes, but a deep, profound sadness. "I didn't take it, Evelyn," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "You have to believe me." "I do, my dear," Evelyn said softly, but her voice was weary. The theft of the brooch, a tangible piece of her beloved husband, had shaken her deeply. Clara knew that Marcus had orchestrated this. He had likely palmed the brooch when she was on the phone. But she had no proof. It was her word, the word of a former waitress, against the word of a Beaumont. She felt the web tightening around her, each strand coated in poison, and for the first time since she'd entered this dazzling new world, she felt utterly and completely alone. The disappearance of the brooch cast a pall over the penthouse. While Evelyn publicly maintained her faith in Clara, the incident created a fracture in the perfect trust they had built. The security investigation was ongoing, a constant unspoken accusation. Staff members who had once been friendly now offered polite but distant smiles. Clara felt like a ghost in her own life, the whispers following her down the marble corridors. Marcus, emboldened by his success, knew it was time to play his final card. His goal was no longer just to oust Clara. It was to seize control of the entire Beaumont empire. He saw his grandmother's steadfast support of Clara not as loyalty, but as a symptom of a deteriorating mind. He began laying the groundwork for the ultimate betrayal. He started by sowing seeds of doubt among key Beaumont Industries board members and family associates. He would arrange concerned lunches and phone calls. "I'm worried about grandmother," he'd say with a sigh, stirring his espresso. "Her judgment isn't what it used to be. This new assistant, the waitress, she has an almost hypnotic hold on her. Evelyn is making rash decisions, reallocating foundation funds based on this girl's whims. She's isolating herself. It's classic undue influence." He collected every piece of evidence he could twist to his narrative. Evelyn's visit to the diner, proof of her wandering, erratic behavior. firing a long-time manager over a $5 dispute, a sign of disproportionate senile rage. Giving a complete stranger a high-paying job and an apartment evidence of her vulnerability to manipulation. The missing brooch was the crown jewel of his argument, proof that his grandmother's chosen confidant was a common thief, and Evelyn was too blind to see it. Meanwhile, Leo's health took a critical turn. His body rejected a round of medication, and Dr. Reed informed Clara that they could wait no longer. A bone marrow transplant was now his only viable option. The search for a donor began immediately. Clara was a partial match, but not ideal. The news sent her reeling, pulling her focus even further from the viper's nest at the Beaumont Tower. She spent every spare moment at the hospital, reading to Leo, her heart aching with a terror that dwarfed all her professional anxieties. This was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. He scheduled an emergency meeting of the Beaumont Industries Board of Directors and key family trustees. He also, through his lawyers, filed a petition in probate court for temporary conservatorship over Evelyn Beaumont and her estate, citing diminished mental capacity. The meeting was held in the main boardroom on the 50th floor, a cavernous space with a table of polished mahogany that felt a mile long. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, a portrait of icy calm, though Clara could see the deep hurt in her eyes. Julian Croft was at her side. Clara stood behind them, feeling small and exposed. Marcus stood at the opposite end, flanked by two lawyers. He presented his case with the slick confidence of a seasoned performer. He painted a picture of a beloved matriarch, sadly succumbing to the ravages of age, being manipulated by a cunning and opportunistic young woman. He presented his doctored reports, his twisted anecdotes, and his court petition. "This is not a hostile takeover," Marcus said, his voice oozing false sincerity. "This is an act of love, an intervention. We need to protect my grandmother from herself and from those who would take advantage of her generosity. I am prepared to step in to act as conservator, to guide this company, and protect my family's legacy until she is well again." The room was thick with tension. Some board members, already primed by Marcus's whispers, looked convinced. Others looked at Evelyn with pity. "Have you finished, Marcus?" Evelyn asked, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I have," he said with a self-satisfied nod. "Good," she replied. She then looked down the table, not at her grandson, but directly at Clara. "Clara, you have been accused of theft, of manipulation, of being a parasite. Is there anything you wish to say in your defense?" Clara's heart hammered. All eyes were on her. Her mind was a maelstrom of fear for her job, for her reputation, but most of all for Leo lying in a hospital bed miles away. She took a breath, and in that moment, all the lessons Evelyn had taught her about strength, about details, about understanding what people truly want, coalesced. She wasn't a scared waitress anymore. "Yes, Mrs. Beaumont, there is," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. She stepped forward and placed a small, simple USB drive on the polished table. "Marcus is correct about one thing." Clara began, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the board members. "He said I was desperate, and I was. When I first met Mrs. Beaumont, I was desperate for a job, for a way to pay for my brother's medicine. But desperation doesn't make you a thief. Sometimes it makes you observant." She nodded to Julian, who inserted the drive into a laptop connected to the room's large display screens. "I knew Marcus was trying to frame me," Clara explained. "So I started paying attention to the details, the little things, like the high-end pawn shop receipt I found in the wastebasket of his study last week, dated the day after the brooch went missing. An image of the receipt appeared on the screens. It was from a discreet, exclusive jeweler known for dealing in high-value, no-questions-asked transactions. Or the audio file, she continued, from the smart speaker in the penthouse office. I remembered it was voice-activated. On a hunch, I asked it to pull the background audio logs from the afternoon Marcus was there. He thought he was alone. Julian pressed a key. Marcus's voice filled the silent room, a hushed but clear whisper. Perfect. Right in my pocket. She'll never see it again. The old fool will blame the waitress, and I'll finally have the leverage I need. Marcus's face went white as a sheet. His lawyers began whispering furiously to him. And finally, Clara said, her voice dropping, there is the matter of the conservatorship. Marcus claims to be acting out of love and concern for his grandmother's well-being. She looked directly at Marcus now, her eyes blazing with cold fire. But I wondered what he truly wanted. More than the company, more than the money. And the answer was freedom. Freedom from any oversight. She nodded to Julian again. A series of bank statements and wire transfers flashed on the screen, showing millions of dollars being funneled from Marcus's venture capital fund, the one Evelyn had seeded to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Marcus isn't trying to protect the Beaumont legacy, Clara announced, her voice ringing with conviction. He's trying to liquidate it. He has been systematically embezzling from this company to cover massive gambling debts. Filing for conservatorship wasn't about protecting his grandmother. It was about getting full, unchecked access to the corporate and personal accounts before the auditors discovered the hole he'd dug. The boardroom erupted. Marcus stood frozen, exposed, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in a matter of minutes. He looked at Evelyn, his face a mask of desperation and hatred. "You," he choked out, pointing a trembling finger at Clara. "You little gutter rat! You ruined everything!" Evelyn Beaumont rose slowly to her full height. The hurt was gone from her eyes, replaced by a gaze as hard and unforgiving as granite. "No, Marcus," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You ruined everything. Security," she commanded. "Escort my grandson out of the building. Julian, proceed with pressing full criminal charges. He is no longer a part of this family or this company." As security guards moved in, a tremor of shock ran through Clara. She had won. She had faced down the dragon and emerged victorious. But just as a wave of relief was about to wash over her, her phone buzzed with a frantic urgency. It was Dr. Reed. She answered, her hand shaking. "Doctor, Clara, you need to get to the hospital. Now." Dr. Reed's voice was strained. "We found a donor for Leo, a perfect match, but there's been a complication with his latest tests. He's crashing. We need to move. Now." The victory in the boardroom vanished, replaced by a primal, gut-wrenching terror. She had saved her reputation, but she was about to lose her entire world. Clara moved through the next few hours in a fog of fear. The victory in the boardroom was ash in her mouth, compared to the terror that gripped her heart. At the hospital, she watched through tears as they wheeled Leo away, to surgery his small body, looking impossibly fragile. The waiting room became her entire world, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against her sanity. As dawn broke, Evelyn Beaumont entered her presence, a quiet anchor in Clara's storm. She sat beside her, taking her cold hand. "There is something you need to know about the donor, Clara," she began softly. Evelyn explained that upon learning of Leo's rare condition, she had her own DNA tested on a whim. She spoke of her and her late husband's inability to have children, a quiet sorrow she had carried for decades. It turns out my family generations ago came from the same small region in Europe as your grandparents. Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. It's a genetic fluke, a 1 in a million chance. The doctors were stunned. Clara stared at her, her mind failing to grasp the implication. What are you saying? I am the donor, Clara. Evelyn whispered, her eyes shining with tears. I was a perfect match. I was in a room down the hall all morning giving my marrow to save our boy. The world tilted on its axis. The kindness in the diner, the job offer, the mentorship, it had all led to this. Evelyn hadn't just given her a job. She was giving her brother life itself. The gesture was so profound, so impossibly generous, it transcended anything Clara could comprehend. Just as this staggering truth settled in, Dr. Reed appeared in the doorway, a tired but brilliant smile on her face. The surgery was a success, she announced. The transplant went perfectly. He's going to make it. A wave of relief so powerful it buckled her knees, washed over Clara. She sobbed not from fear, but from a gratitude so immense it was painful collapsing into Evelyn's embrace. In that moment, they were not boss and employee. They were family, forged in crisis and bound by love. The aftermath was a new beginning. Marcus was imprisoned for his crimes, a forgotten chapter in their lives. Leo's recovery was a miracle. He returned to being a vibrant, laughing boy, with Aunt Evelyn cheering him on at every soccer game. Evelyn, seeing Clara's innate strength and sharp mind, funded her education and groomed her for leadership. Together they launched the multi-billion-dollar Leo Beaumont Children's Health Foundation, dedicated to helping families just like theirs. At the inaugural gala, Clara stood at the podium as its executive director, a poised woman who had found her purpose. She realized Evelyn hadn't just saved her from poverty. She had saved her from a life without hope. And Clara, in her own way, had saved Evelyn from a life of gilded loneliness. They had found in each other the truest kind of wealth, a family born not of blood, but of a simple act of kindness in a run-down diner. Clara's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth is not defined by our job title or our bank balance, but by the character we show when no one is watching. A simple act of compassion, a $10 bill given with an open heart set in motion, a journey that changed everything. It proves that integrity is the most valuable asset we can possess, and that the right people, the people who value that integrity, will find you. It reminds us that behind every stranger's face is a story we can't possibly know, and a moment of kindness can ripple outward in ways we could never ever predict. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of compassion in a world that often feels cold, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder that good people and incredible possibilities are still out there. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story that proves the very best parts of humanity are always worth fighting for. Thank you for listening.